In this episode of Middle East Files, the mosaic of religion in the Levant, a region home to the birth of monotheistic religions, is witnessing the persecution of minorities by terrorists. Can communities that have long lived in the Middle East be kicked out of their homes? Who are the religious groups that were forced to escape Takfiri genocide? The Levant, historical home of religious minorities, in this edition of Middle East Files.
Hello, welcome to this edition of Middle East Files. This week's episode will give you a look at the mosaic of minorities here in the Levant. Is a religiously diverse region. It is known to be the cradle of civilizations as it consists of a mosaic of minorities. The origins of the world's oldest religions are also found within the Middle East. Here's a look at our first file. The town of Bethlehem in Palestine saw the birth of Prophet Isa, or Jesus Christ. His teachings spread in the Levant and the Arab world long before reaching Rome and Europe. As a result, Christian communities flourished across the region. Some natives in modern-day Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq embraced the teachings of Christ during that time. As these communities grew, they established their own churches. The two main schools were established in Antioch and Alexandria. Christianity quickly became the biggest religion in the Middle East. It remained that way until the advent of Islam 6 centuries later. The Middle Eastern Christian schools shared a lot with Islam. While Islam overtook them in terms of popularity in the region, they kept an active and coexistential role in some Muslim societies until today. In fact, a number of Christians from smaller churches sought refuge in the region to escape the persecution of the Byzantine Empire. The Nestorian Christian community in Bahrain is an example of that. The largest church in the region today is the Coptic Church in Egypt, with an estimation of 8 to 10 million followers. Assyrian Christians in Iraq used to number 1 million before the American invasion in 2003. Today, only a third of them remain in Iraq. Armenian Christians are spread throughout the region from northern Iran in the east to Beirut in the west. Over a third of Lebanon's population is Christian. While various denominations exist in Lebanon, the largest group is Maronite Christians. Jordan is home to about 400,000 native Christians. In Palestine, the Christian community has fought Israeli occupation alongside the Muslim majority. In Syria, the Greek Orthodox and Greek Catholic churches dominate among Christians. The country has a total Christian population of over 2 million people. This makes Syria home to the second largest Christian community in the Middle East. Discussing the Christians of the Levant is Mr. Habib Ifram, and he's the president of the Syriac League in Lebanon. Mr. Habib, I want to ask you the question of maybe what kind of fears do the Christians have today, the Christians of the Levant, considering such groups in the region like the so-called ISIL, the Nusra Front? Really, what does the future look like for the Christians here in the region?
It is not only the future and the fate of the Christians, it is the fate of this part of the world. It is the fate of Iraq. Would Iraq remain the country that we knew, or this is a new Sykes-Picot coming, or this is a new change in borders, change in states? Would Syria remain the same? The Syria that for the last 100 years have been here. The change is within Islam. Who is the face of Islam? Who does represent Islam or the Arab world? So these are questions that accordingly I can answer you what is the future of the Christians. But when we see that in one day, only in one day, the historical presence of the indigenous people of Iraq, the Christians, in Nineveh Plains, for example, were destroyed in one day, and people had to leave. Something like 120,000 people in 45 villages in one day after the attack of ISIS. And neither the government in Baghdad, nor even the Peshmerga of the Kurdish north state, let's say, did nothing to help them, nor the Arab world, nor the West was even ready to stop these attacks. You have a big question. Our people, seeing what is happening in Iraq, do not have faith in what is happening, and you are dealing with a group of terrorists or people that have practically no values.
Mr. Habib, I want to ask you, do you think maybe the Christians of the Middle East are closer maybe to the Muslims in the region than maybe they are to various Western denominations?
We are part of this world. We are the indigenous people of here, of the Levant, of Lebanon, of Syria, of Iraq. Our roots are here. The names of these countries, of these villages, of these rivers, of these mountains is our language, the Syriac language, has been here a lingua franca from 7,000 and 8,000 years. We live here, and even Christianity began here in Jerusalem, in Urushalim, not in Rome, not in Paris, not in New York, not in Chicago. We are the Christians, and we are part of this world. We lived with Islam. We know Islam. We don't read about Islam. We live with Muslims. It is the responsibility of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, to admit that he is in trouble, that not always putting the blame on others. These movements within our communities, within our societies, we are responsible for it. And we have to see from governments to political parties to religious leadership where we were not present, why this is happening.
Islam is by far the region's most popular religion. 20% of the world's Muslims live in the Middle East. However, the Levant today is being invaded by Takfiri forces foreign to the region and Islam. Let's take a look at the Takfiri phenomenon from a historical perspective. since the message of Islam was spread by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, the majority of people in the Middle East became Muslim. Over the years, Islam progressed on the concept of scholarship. Muslim scholars rose to prominence based on the ability to adopt the teachings of Islam to different eras of history. However, throughout centuries of Islamic progress, there has been years of fitna that have hindered progress to some extent. Away from the false dichotomy promoted in the US and Saudi-dominated mass media today, Islam developed as a religion with different scholarship centers around the globe. Hanbali, Hanafi, Jafari, Maliki, and Shafi'i schools of jurisprudence became the most prominent. Other scholars had limited followership. However, they all agreed on the basic tenets of Islam and saw little infighting or fitna. The region is home to Alawis in Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey. Ismailis live in Syria and Lebanon. While the difference of scholarship interpretations are complex, they are still minor in the case of major denominations. For over 1,400 years, these various schools have survived and expelled seditious attempts by those supporting Takfirism and fitna. The recent rise in Takfiri extremism cannot be attributed to Islam, but rather to malicious intentions to divide Islam. Groups that espouse this violent ideology are inflated with financing and military backing to exaggerate their influence. In the case of ISIL, this backing came from Western powers, mainly US and UK, and their Arab allies, mainly Qatar and Saudi Arabia. However, as with previous attempts for fitna or sedition to disrupt peace amongst Muslims, it seems like this time the Muslim community have no other way but to come together to terminate the big threat. Further discussing the minorities in the Levant is Dr. Tarif Khalidi, and he's the author of The Muslim Jesus. Can ISIL delete, maybe, if you want, this rich history that we have here? I mean, is ISIL capable of doing so? As you know, the Levant is a mixture, is a mosaic of these minorities. Is ISIL capable of deleting such rich history that we have today in the Middle East?
A movement which has such a sudden beginning will, God willing, have a sudden end as well. But I think so far they're doing enormous damage to Christian-Muslim relations and with other minorities as well, like the Azyadiyya and so on and so forth. This is unprecedented because Islamic civilization, if it has anything to boast about to the world, it would be its record of coexistence and pluralism. And so therefore, in a sense, you know, I always say, if there was a Nobel Peace Prize of the Middle Ages, it would be given to Islamic civilization. This is the jewel in our crown, is our record of pluralism and coexistence. And whether these people can destroy it or not, I very much hope not, because the history here is very, very long. And this is such a freak of nature. These people, ISIL and Daesh and Nusra and so on, are freaks. They're freaks of nature.
What's the common struggle today between the Muslims and the Christians?
Well, lots of common struggles, but I think that the greatest struggle at the moment is a struggle against ignorance. We must bring to the fore our long history of mutual understanding. Let's take one example, the example that I try to show in my book on the Muslim Jesus. The love affair, the respect, the spirituality of Jesus as it appears in the Islamic tradition. The amount of love and respect that is paid to him in the Islamic piety is something that we should underline, we should bring to the fore, we should remind ourselves of these traditions. And on the other hand, there are also Christian theologians living in Muslim countries, and even Jewish theologians who in the past and even today acknowledge that Muhammad is a prophet of God and so on. So these things, these commonalities should be brought out, should be emphasized. And that is, to me at least, this is the common struggle. You know. We should educate ourselves. It occurs to me very often to say that minority and majority are really in the eyes of the beholder, that they are subjective categories, because no minority would ever say, I am a minority in the absolute sense, because there will be, at the back of their minds, there will be minorities elsewhere that would, if joined to them, would become a majority. So it's often, as I say, kind of subjective, rather than an objective reality. And it's often in the eye of the beholder, so to speak.
Has always been a safe haven for persecuted minorities. Throughout history, many ethnic and religious groups sought shelter in the Levant to escape genocide. For example, here in South Lebanon, Israel has damaged the shrine of Prophet Sujud. The Zionist project has also forced hundreds of thousands of both Christians and Muslims from their homes. This year saw the rise of the Takfiri group Daesh, or ISIL. In July of this year, ISIL threatened the presence of Christians in the city of Mosul. Christians had inhabited Mosul for 2 millennia. On August 3rd, persecution of Yazidi Kurds by ISIL commenced. Yazidis had also inhabited the Sinjar Mountains for several centuries. Of course, ISIL violence extends to Muslims too. Throughout history, a number of campaigns have persecuted religious minorities in the region, and the Levant has been a historical shelter of persecuted minorities. Since 1948, the Zionist project in Israel pushed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians out their homes. These refugees found shelter in neighboring countries. A century ago, Armenians fleeing Turkish persecution found shelter in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The Maronite community flourished in Mount Lebanon, but it wasn't born there. The high mountains and secluded valleys was the safe haven they found away from Ottoman persecution. In his book, The House of Mansions, Lebanese historian Kamal Saliba details some of these persecutions. The Shia of Lebanon had also been targeted. The Mamluks in the 13th century and Ahmad Pasha al-Jazzar in the 18th century killed thousands of Shias and forced the community to seek shelter in the mountains and valleys of the Levant. Despite these ugly historical incidents, they remain as anomalies in the region. Almost every time strife strikes in the Levant, the perpetrators are foreign invaders. The same can be said about the current campaign against the mosaic of communities, which call the Levant home. Further shedding light on the persecuted minorities in the Levant is Mr. Wadi Al-Khazin. He's the former Lebanese minister as well as president of the Central Maronite Council. I'd like to begin with the question of what kind of threat do these extremist groups we're seeing today, like Daesh, pose to both the Christians and the Muslims of the Middle East?
Daesh and Nasra, they are groups which work by proxy. They have been given orders to do what they are doing. and they are directly touching the backgrounds of the Christians of the Orient. And this matter is concerning directly the Israeli enemy, because the Israelis, since they have been implemented in the Middle East and took over the Palestinian territory, the Israelis have a far objective in mind, which is to destabilize the region and the countries which are neighboring Israel, namely Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Now, we have to approach the matter in a deep manner by looking at Israel and at what are the objectives of Israel. If Israel, in connivance with other parties in the world, insists on continuing the schedule that has been submitted to change the demography of this region, like it happened in the Accord of Sykes-Picot, it means that there is a problem which we are going to face. It's the problem of the Christians, because the main target is the Christians. The Israelis do not want any Christians in masses here in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, Iraq. They want them out of this country because they think that the Christians are the direct competitor of the Israelis in the region, and there will not be an understanding between Christians and Israelis. The Christians are targeted, the minorities are targeted in the region, the Shiites are targeted, the Sunnis are targeted, the Druze are targeted, everybody is targeted here, because there is a plan which might be applied and executed soon, or might be also postponed for a later stage, which is to divide these countries into interconfessional states. The Muslim religion is not the religion of the Qaeda, is not the religion of Daesh, is not the religion of Nasra. The Muslim religion is a peaceful religion. It seeks peace, it seeks good relation between other religions, and the Muslim faith is so near to the Christian faith.
ISIL and other Takfiri forces have forced hundreds of thousands of minorities to leave their homes. It is the latest attempt to destroy the region and where the message of God first arrived. Will they succeed? Well, history has testified to their failure. Thanks so much for watching this edition of Middle East Files. Until next time, goodbye.